Hi everybody, happy Friday and welcome to the very last lesson on Victorians. Now, today's all about Victorian explorers. The incredible thing is, when Victoria came to the throne, nobody had been to the Western United States. Nobody had been to Northern Canada. Nobody had been to the centre of the Brazilian rainforest. Nobody had been to the centre of Africa. The source of the River Nile had not been found. No European had been to Ayers Rock in Australia. There were huge areas of the world undiscovered. Now, I'm going to read you this account from one of my favourite books, which is called The Pocket Dangerous Book for Boys. It's also good for girls as well. And this is the story of Scott of the Antarctic. Captain Scott was an explorer, and he'd been on various ships and been on various trips, and the law of the Antarctic struck him so deeply that he decided to go for the South Pole. Now, there was also a man called Roald Amundsen, a Norwegian man, who too was trying to get to the South Pole, and the two of them started in 1910. Scott received a telegram from Amundsen saying, beg leave, inform you, proceeding Antarctic, Amundsen. And that was it. Scott knew the race was on. His ship, the Terra Nova, entered the pack ice, smashing its way through and finally anchoring to solid ice in January 1911. The sledges, base equipment and supplies were unloaded. And then this is when the first disaster struck. The motorised sledge disappeared through the pack ice, disappearing into the sea. Now, they couldn't just go in one go for the South Pole, so they had to establish camps further and further south. This took a long time. The ponies that they took did not do well at all, and frostbite was really affecting some of the men, even though they had at the time their latest technology. The conditions were awful. Constant blizzard pinned them to the tents. The ponies were all dead by the time that they reached the last camp, dragging sledges up a 10,000-foot glacier. Then, the final slog. Scott picked his best men for the job: Wilson, Evans, Oates and Bowers for the final slog to the South Pole. Each man had to haul 200 pounds on their sledges. There were no dogs left. The team of 5 battled through blizzards to reach the 89th parallel, the last parallel before the South Pole. It was then that they crossed the tracks of Amundsen and his dog team. Had Amundsen got there before? Scott and the others were touched by despair, but they went on regardless, determined to reach the South Pole. They finally stood there at the southernmost point of the earth on the 17th of January 1912. But there they found a tent with the names of Roald Amundsen and 4 other men. They had got there just a month before, on the 14th of December 1911. The disappointment weighed heavily on all of them. There had been fewer closer races in history with so much at stake. The return journey began well, but then the temperatures got colder and colder, -43 Fahrenheit. On the 17th of March, Oates said that he could not go on, and he knew that he was slowing them down. But they put up the tent, and they kept Oates in the middle. The next morning there was a blizzard. Oates stood up and turned and said, "I'm going outside and maybe some time." Scott wrote in his diary, "We knew poor Oates was walking to his death, but we didn't try. But although we tried to dissuade him, we knew that it was the act of a brave man and an English gentleman to not slow us down." Oates was never seen again, and to this day, his body hasn't been found. Scott's final diary entry said, "It seems a pity, but I do not think that I can write any more. For God's sake, look after our people." With the diary ended, Scott wrote letters to the families of all of those who died. Even though he was really sick and dying himself, he wrote a letter to everybody's family, including his own wife and their only son. Now, over to you. There are so many different explorers that you could do a fact file for. This is the one here for Robert Scott to have a look at. And here's some of the explorers that you could pick, Victorian explorers. African explorers. You could have Mary Kingsley, Henry Stanley, or David Livingstone. So you could research them. Or Ernest Shackleton, a friend of Robert Falcon Scott, who was also an Arctic and Antarctic explorer. You could have John Franklin, who tried to find the Northwest Passage to sail ships through the Arctic over the north of Canada. Or for South America, you could choose Henry Bates, Charles Darwin, Alexander von Humboldt, or Robert McClure. Good luck. I can't wait to see your finished fact files. Take this as an extra task if you'd like for the research to do over half term. Good luck, everybody. Stay safe. Keep washing those hands.